I'm currently studying my master's in supply chain engineering, and this week I wanted to do something a little different. We had a case study of Quincy Apparel in my uh, finance and private equity class. So it's not quite supply chain engineering, but it was one of the more interesting topics or readings that I did over this past week. So the beginning is more about setting up the initial company. So we're looking at a company that was around in 2012 and how it went through its first year of growth, and it initially ended up failing. But the two creators were Christina Wallace, a double major at Emory who studied math and theater studies, and then later went on to get an MBA in Harvard Business School. And then Alex Nelson, who was a mechanical engineer at MIT, then worked for Boston Consulting Group for a couple years, and then also got her MBA at Harvard Business School. The two grew close interning at Boston Consulting Group and became good friends. So one day they were out shopping, looking at for a young professional women's clothings, and they had the idea of starting out their own company. So their problem is that women's styling is based off 1940s methodology, and it has a lot of room for growth, and envisioned styling women's clothes in a style similar to men's. And again, the stylish for young professional women trying to get into the working world, because their biggest problem was that fits don't fit very well at all. So moving on to the trim business model, they had a target range of outfits or suits being about 250 to 450. So on the cheaper end of the suit market, then they wanted to model Warby Parker and cut out wholesalers and resellers. So before doing their launch, they did a product testing through trunk shows throughout Boston, so Harvard, BU, and MIT. From the trunk show sales and testing, they found that 50% of garment fit as an important factor, and 81% of their respondents had difficulty finding work apparel that fit. So their business plan was to use a large-scale factory to take garments to 80% of completion, and then as you get an order, get a request, you do the final 20% to make it to order, so it fits as expected. And due to cutting up wholesalers and retailers, the plan was to do the majority of sales through e-commerce and the other 15% through direct sales. So as they grow up, the co-CEOs had originally been acting as co-CEOs, so they made each decision together. But as they had to develop and as they were working full time, they couldn't necessarily act. So they kind of split up the duties. Wallace took investors, human relations, marketing, press, and business development, while Nelson took production, procurement, and e-commerce. They started out with 25K from family and 30K from other friends and family. Their first hiring was a Project Runway freelancer, and with her, she helped design an 11-piece spring collection to start off spring of 2012. Then, with the soft launch, they had 75K from angel investors, going from raising or making profits of 5,400, then 9,100, then 1040. But again, the struggle was returns was an error, so they had higher returns, and that wasn't profit, that was sales. So my misspeaking earlier. But their marketing plan was to use word of mouth, so that if someone recommended the fit to someone else, it would then they would then give you $50 off your next order. So moving into summer and fall, they had another 250K from angel investors and had an 18-piece fall and winter collection. So they scaled up the number of pieces that they were offering, or had 42K worth of sales in October and 62K worth of sales in November. The return rate still was way higher than they expected at 35%. They had offered an expectation of 20%, and as times were getting tougher and more hard decisions were having to be made, the company had the co-sales, Nelson and them, had a saying, "Do you want to get coffee?" every time they had to have an argument or had some decision that needed to be talked through, and that became a known we're having an issue saying throughout the company. So here are the projections, their actual projections in October, actual earnings in October was 42,000, and then estimated annual was 421,000, and projecting growth for the future that they were hoping to earn, but weren't able to accomplish. Different customer patterns, so they put customers into 4 categories: affluent, traditionalist, rising stars, trend seekers, and the fit skeptics. So their biggest issue was the high return rate. So they put all the high return rate people into the fit skeptics, which, even though the overall was 35%, the return rate for the fit skeptics was 85%. So looking at profitability among the other 3 segments, affluent traditionals, they earned an average of 1,600, or thought they would earn. Rising stars 1,000, and then trend seekers 240. And then looking at the cost of acquiring each of those customers, 125 for affluent traditionalists, 95 for rising stars, and then 80 for trend seekers. So overall thoughts, this is kind of a combination of my first thoughts and then kind of what the class discussed when we discussed it this past Thursday. I kind of, this being my first business case, I found it interesting at how little we went into details of like what was actually in the reading, but how much kind of assumptions we made, and how much we were like, if you did this, it could have been right, or if you made these changes, your process would have been improved in the future. So I felt like I should have focused my reading more on what they should have changed rather than what they were doing, if that makes sense. So the first major issue was the fact that they had co-CEOs. The professor didn't know and have an example of when co-CEOs had ever been successful, but according to one of the students, Allbirds may be a successful co-CEO company, but it's just so much rarer. You often need one person to make decisions. In my experience with engineers, you come with a problem of 2 engineers, and they'll give you why you should do something or why you should do something else, a pro con. They can give you, but no one ever wants to make the final decision. It's tough for engineers to end up going with one decision. The other thing that was brought up is to receive another round of funding. We would have recommended that they restructure and give Alex Nelson full control of of the company so that they were no longer co-CEOs, and it seemed like from the plan in the write-up that Alex Nelson was more aligned with trimming down the company so that they could be profitable. So moving on to market issues. It was too large of an audience in terms of sizing and fit, so maybe cut down the spring collection and the fall and winter collection, which had grown from 11 pieces to, I think it was 18 pieces, so that you can get a couple things right rather than a bunch of things wrong. Also, shaking up the sizing standards so that you aren't carrying as many obscure standards, so that you can have a smaller inventory and thus be spending less. And then inventory issues. The large stock leads to heavy upfront costs, so you want to do anything you can do to minimize upfront costs. And then the large return rate. So have a better way of dealing with return rate, whether that is finding a way to be able to resell it. I'm not sure that was talked about in the business case, or just finding a way so that you have less stuff sitting in inventory, whether that is make to order, and that may be more costly but a longer response time so that you have less stuff waiting, but that is something worth looking into to cut the investment that they have to do prior. So hiring a better team. In the case, it sounded like the hirings were, instead of like proud to work on a startup, like trying to make the most of it, instead they felt like they were doing a favor. So even though it is often difficult to hire for a startup, you need to find people who are motivated and want to make the most of this opportunity, rather than that they have no motivation and lack that extra oomph to get them over the hump, and seem like people would only stay in their silos rather than being willing to do whatever it took to help the company. Then better supply chain. So from the trunk show to the spring collection to the winter collection, they had different difficulties acquiring the cloth to create the clothes. So finding a consistent dealer who could help them from season to season rather than having to find a new supplier along the way. And then again, trying to make sure you have less stocks so you have less upfront costs, and also deal with the return rate. So finding a way where that can also be used. Better marketing. So the marketing of using $50 for promotion, that helps you grow at an okay rate. They were getting good coverage, but they needed a way to grow at a faster rate. And to do that, our class suggested using almost proper marketing rather than just a $50 referral. Then from some quick maths, and the average loss was around $49K. So to get them through to the next season, the class recommended giving them $500K, so you get them through the spring collection of 2013. Because at the end of this case, they had been struggling. They had $100K left, which was about 2 months, but then they wanted to return some money to investors. So they were choosing to wrap up a month early due to not being able to receive the proper financing. So moving on to other stuff from this week. But I guess first, to wrap up the case, I thought it was very interesting to be in my first business class business case. I found it interesting that we were more focused on what to do differently rather than what happened, because you're worried about the future and how to correct things rather than the past and what you did wrong, because you can always move forward and find a better way forward rather than focus on the past and what you did wrong. So it's kind of a good life lesson in that way, but always focus on how you can do better in the future. So and other stuff this week, supply chain, engineering, warehouse, and distribution. We had the week off because it's a Monday Wednesday class, so no Monday due to Labor Day, and then Wednesday was a field trip, which I didn't get to go on. I'm on a field trip in October, so excited for that, but that's a few weeks away. And then operations research one we did, we got into a more difficult simplex algorithm, and we have our first homework due for that this week. Then operational research 2, more between discrete and continuous functions and different statistics based off them. So entrepreneurial finance and private equity, this Quincy Apparel case. Then moving on to job recruitment season. It's been kind of a crazy last 2 weeks, and I don't really see it ending anytime soon, but I've applied to 2 companies so far. I have 2 more to apply to today, and then career fair starts next week. But one of my one-on-ones with KPMG, senior associate, and having talked about my coming from an aerospace background and then kind of being forced right away to go into supply chain engineering and consulting, which is kind of the goal. But he said he did that when he went to Emory for an MBA, and he says I need to develop a good story of why am I kind of a nobody in supply chain? Why would I be good for your consulting firm? So that's something I need to work on. Probably won't get to it till it's time for my first interview, but I definitely need to work on that. And then the other thing that kind of struck me, looking at our supply chain day, is there were 17 companies there, but only 5 were hiring international students, which is about 2/3 of our supply chain cohort, if not closer to 80%. It almost seems unfair that just because I'm American and I have a U.S. citizenship that I can get, so I have so many other opportunities open. Looking at how much it takes to sponsor someone, in 2019 it took about, I think it was $4,500 worth of fees and then $3,000 worth of lawyer fees, so in total about $7,500 per sponsorship, and that is pricey, but I'm sure some of my amazing international student co-members would be willing to take that much off their salary for an opportunity to work in the U.S. It just almost seems unfair at this point, but it's the world we live in, and you just got to deal with it. But I feel very lucky and very privileged to be able to apply to every company at these fairs. And thank you. Have a good day. I hope to see you all next week. If you